How do you manage your difficult patients, the patients that just drive you crazy? This is a legitimate question and probably of far more importance than ever more medical education. You see, we don't have a problem with the amount of information that we've got access to. That problem disappeared some years ago. Is there too much information? Yes, for sure. Our ability to access what we need in the moment remains a problem, but we have been faced with a much bigger problem. And that is, how are we looking after ourselves? I was chatting to my wife today, and she had an interesting thing to say. She said, I've realized that when I get pissed off with people, the trigger is in me. Now this is a significant breakthrough. Whether it's going to be transformational for my wife or not, I don't know. But previously, she's had a very strong story that it was them. It was their fault. They did something and they need to change. The problem with this is that people are hard to get to change. My ability to get anybody else to change against their will, zero. Can they change? Yes. But there are specific circumstances that's required. And it leaves me and my wife and all of us, particularly as doctors, in a difficult situation. What are we going to do when people annoy us, frustrate us, piss us off? I don't know whether you've had this consult. You're sitting there and just like, I just want this consult to end. How much more have I got to endure in this consult? And some doctors I've seen, it's like, I never want to see this patient again. Never allow this patient to book with me again. And that's one strategy. That's definitely one strategy. But there might be better strategies than just blocking the patients that piss us off. You see, the unfortunate thing that I've found is that they tend to show up in another form. A different patient shows up and they annoy me and they piss me off. I'm like, I block them too and block everybody. And suddenly I've got a problem. I got no patience. But the question is there a better way? If that's something that perhaps you're interested in, if you're struggling with this, like how do I deal with the patients that annoy me, frustrate me, drive me crazy, that I never want to see again? How am I going to do that? If that's you, there's a link on this little post. Click that and go through and check out what I've got to say there. Because as I said earlier, we are not suffering from a absence of medical information, of medical knowledge. It's all on the internet. Dr. Google, been around for a while now. But are we dealing with problems in burnout, in doctors working less, in doctors quitting, in doctors ending up in trouble with drinking and cheating and gambling? Yes. These are legitimate problems, even if people aren't owning up to them. We are in a particularly dangerous place. You see, not only are we dealing with the medicine, but we're also the de facto clergy. Now, this was first brought to my attention in America. And I'd been with a buddy of mine, and we'd been to Europe, and we're like, hey, Europe's amazing. Guess what they put on the top of the hills? They put the churches. But in America, we looked up on the top of the hill, and what was on the top of the hill? A church? No, definitely not. A hospital. Now, Australia may not have the hills with the hospitals, but we are struggling in a spiritual crisis for sure. Church attendance, who goes? I don't know. I haven't been to church in years. My spirituality is extremely strong, but I don't show up to a church. I find it boring and dead. But people are looking for something. They're struggling out there. Why am I here? What's my purpose? What's this life thing about? They're spiritual questions. And guess who they're showing up to? They're showing up to us as doctors. And so not only have we got their health problems, but we've got all of their anxiety, depression, mental health. Underlying that at some level is likely some spiritual problems as well. But how much spirituality training did you get at med school or in your GP training? Or even since then? Not a lot. Probably not a lot. It's like, well, maybe we should send them to the psychologists. And the psychologists are great. They do a really good job, but we are still facing the burden of dealing with patient after patient that are bringing problems to us that may be health, but maybe mental health, maybe spiritual, and they're expecting us to have answers. And this is heavy. This is a heavy load. Like, I don't know how you finish the end of your day, but when I finish the end of my day, I'm like, oh man, I am cooked. I am cooked. I cannot see any more patients. And I've often had the experience with 3 or 4 or 5 patients to go. And I'm just like, I just want to finish now. Can this day just finish now? And what I have to do is then come back and see that patient that I am seeing right now. That's the only option that I've got. It's like, be with this patient. I can't see the last patient until I get to the last patient. And the only way I'm going to get to the last patient is if I see each of these patients and get the door and consult with them. And so the trick is to be present, And that is the art form. But I find there's just this onslaught of challenges that we've got. Every patient now is bringing a significant level of difficulty that appears to me to be far in excess of what we used to deal with. Going back 5 years, going back 10 years, I don't know how long you've been in practice for, but the level of difficulty, the level of complexity, the level of exhaustion in these patients, the level of frustration, it's hard to consult with these guys. Like, it's literally hard to consult. And so it comes down to the question, well, what are my options? I can block everybody, don't want to see them, but it's probably not going to work. Perhaps there are some better ways to take a trigger where I've been angry or sad or even fearful, scared of patients. And this is probably not so much happened, but it has happened. It's like, whoa, I don't trust this patient at all. They seem on edge. But if you are a woman and you're a doctor, like, this is a legitimate concern. People wanting drugs or whatever, and it's like, hey, give me the drugs or I will. Like, what's the plan for that? Have you role-played that in your practice? It's probably worth doing. Hey, emergency. Do you have the button under the desk that alerts? Because if you haven't practiced it and then it happens, it's a really bad time to find that the system for alerting the rest of the practice that there's a problem in your room doesn't work. It's very scary. It's very difficult. And if you haven't got the button, then check out the room design. Make sure that your desk is not further away from the door than the patient. Get them to come in and sit further away from the door than you are, so you can get to the door and they can't block the door. Failing all of that, scream fire. And scream and scream and scream. But these are the challenges. We are running into people that are struggling with their lives. And we're seeing them. We're consulting them with them. You don't know how close they are to the edge. But here's the challenge. What are you going to do with these patients that trigger you? Because you can pretend that they don't trigger you. And that is usually what happens. And that means the trigger just gets buried down inside. And the next one comes and bury and bury and bury until you're like, oh, what is wrong with me? I don't know what's wrong. There's something wrong. That's because all of the triggers from the patients that we see got buried. And it's not a sustainable methodology to practice. So you got to have something else that works. What do I use? I use two things. Number one, meditation. Meditation daily. Daily meditation. Now, am I perfect? No, but the vast majority of days for the last, I started meditating in 2007. Vast majority of days, it certainly in the early days was sporadic. Last 5 years, pretty solid. Maybe 5 to 10 missed days of meditation. Critical. Heavy days, twice a day, 3 times a day. Meditation is an essential skill set, but it's not enough. You see, you need a methodology that will get to the trigger. And just like my wife said, hey, the triggers are in me. If you can understand that, then that brings the power back to us personally to deal with that trigger. And if I can deal with the trigger and resolve it, then it's done with. Next time it shows up, I've got a new methodology, a new action for dealing with that same trigger. And I will get a different response. It won't trigger me. I've literally had this experience. I'm like sitting there, same patient, same behavior from them, different response in me. Why? Because of the questions that I asked myself. A series of questions to go through and say, what's going on in me? How do I feel about it? What's the story I'm telling myself? In more advanced forms, I can go, when did this first show up? Where is it in my body? And then, what am I going to do with it? Once I'm clear on what it is and where it came from and how I feel about it, then I got an option to do something different. It doesn't just play in my subconscious over and over and over. And this is an extremely liberating experience. Instead of getting buried down and making me exhausted, I get an option for something else, which is to transform it, and I'm done. I can put the weight down. I don't know where this stuff comes from. All I know is that that patient triggered me, and then I need some tool, some methodology to resolve it. Can you use ChatGPT? Sure. Type it in ChatGPT. ChatGPT is a pretty crazy therapist, which is concerning for us. But, as I've spoken before, AI will never be a human. It'll never be a human. But your capacity to take the trigger and learn from it, find out what's causing it, do something different because of that trigger and resolve it. Sometimes I've had to go multiple days on the same trigger, just over and over and over and over. I had a report to do, and I couldn't write the damn report. Day 1, couldn't do it. Day 2, couldn't do it. And I'm going through these series of questions. Digging. Day 3, couldn't do it. Day 4, couldn't do it. Day 5, couldn't do it. Day 6, it's due on day 7. Day 6, suddenly it cracked. And this thing came out, and I was like, oh my God, so painful, so old. I don't even know. It felt like it was like from like, I don't know, 5 or 6 years old. This thing stuck in my chest. And I'm like, out comes this thing. And then guess what happened? I could write the report. The report got written. And before that, if I didn't have this tool, this mechanism to take the trigger, take the difficulty in my life and process it without having to go to a psychologist, without having to involve anyone else, just through a series of questions. Yes, it took 6 days, but it finally cracked. And this was a big one. And then the report got done, handed it in, done and dusted. So the question I got for you is, what tools do you use when you are triggered? If you want some new options, there's a link underneath this post somewhere. Click through that, go check it out. It's an opt-in page. Put in your name, you put in your email, And we'll go through to some further training around the difficulties that we are having in general practice and some solutions that we can look at. All right, that's all I got for you. Hope you're having an awesome day. Do consider where you are at with your daily practice. What are you doing with the patients who trigger you? And this is an important question to consider, because if you don't have a method or a methodology or a strategy to deal with these patients, then your risk of burnout, your risk of difficulties, your risk of making mistakes all go up, causing a lot more problems in your life than if you just deal with the triggers. All right, I gotta go jump in my band. I've got a jam session for about an hour and a half. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Catch you then.